Well, hello, welcome everyone. As colleagues are joining to this Thinking Big meeting of the Town Hall on Caring Systems, let me just remind a couple of technical details that you might be already familiar with. Of course, as always, please keep your mics closed until you want to speak. When you want to speak, you just need to raise your hand in the reactions box below your screen, and interpretation is available in French, Spanish, and English, as well as transcriptions. This being said, I leave the floor to our Secretary General, Emilia Saiz, to open this meeting. Emilia.
Well, thank you very much. I always have this great task of opening up the discussions, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all. Some of you have heard this story before, but for those of you that have not been involved in our town hall process, I just want to share with you that this kind of process is our instrument to discuss with civil society, organized civil society organizations, to ensure that the voices of the communities are heard by our political leadership, and that the visions of civil society are included in our work plans, but also in the type of policies that we are proposing to develop. It is actually a very important legacy for us because it builds on the process that we used to collaborate with stakeholders and civil society during the SDG definition, but also during Habitat 3 and as our inputs for other global agendas. It is also a very important building block of our past Congress in Durban in 2019, and it is consolidating now for our current Congress in Lyon at the end of the year in October. We want to ensure that your views, your voices are feeding into our actions, into the kind of policies that we are promoting. And we are working here in this town hall process with trusted organizations, with trusted partners that have been accompanying our discussions. We have not stopped working in between Congress in these 3 years. And in particular, during the pandemic, we have put our heads together and we have been discussing how the pandemic was affecting our systems, our day-to-day life, but also our governance. And we have put all this thinking and all these thoughts in an interactive platform, the Cities Are Listening platform, which I invite you to check. Because it shows how many different topics we have been discussing. Now, in the previous town hall process, we chose to address important thematic areas, complex thematic areas, such as gender equality, such as informality, such as accessibility. And now we are taking a step further, building on those 3 years of exchanges that we have had together. What we are proposing is to look at complex notions that we think are going to be very critical to transform our societies, to actually reach sustainability, and to ensure that that we address governance in a new way. And of course, we cannot forget that United Cities and local governments represents elected officials around the world, a sphere of government around the world, and it is their work that we would like you to influence. You need to hold us accountable, and that is the type of process that that we have initiated this year, but building on work that we have already done. And one of the most relevant concepts that we are working on as a movement, as the international municipal movement, is this concept of care. When the world stopped in 2020, we started to see how cities, local and regional governments were starting to adapt their service provision. There were defining new essentials, new type of services, new ways to provide services. And it led us all to think that inequalities was a very important part of the problem in addressing some of the global crises that we needed to address, and that while the SDGs were still a very solid and useful framework to address many of the global challenges, we also needed to look at other types of transformations that would shift the system towards more inclusion, towards leaving no one behind, towards care, caring for each other. Caring for each other also at the heart of local service provision. So going from a service provision mentality to a care mentality. What does it imply? We are talking all about care all the time, healthcare. We are talking about transformation, but we need to give it content. And this is the kind of conversation that we think will help us give content to the work that we need to do in the coming years. United Cities and Local Governments has been mandated by the political leadership to develop a new social contract based on the global agendas that we have all accepted and embraced. A new social contract that will need to define our responsibilities and our commitments for the future, finding a balance between the needs of current and future generations. We call it the Pact for the Future. And we think it is an important contribution as well for our common agenda of the United Nations. That Pact for the Future for people, planet, and government needs to be organized around care, if you ask us. But how does it look like? What kind of new leadership do we need to ensure that? A feminist leadership, probably, a new concept of ecologism, and a new type of governance system. So not simple questions overall. Around these three axes, we have also organized these town halls, and beyond this town hall on care systems, we also have a town hall defining the new commons, the new essentials. We also have a town hall around trust and government. How are we going to make that transformation possible? And yesterday we held a discussion around climate and culture. In fact, about culture and sustainability. So we've got a lot of hope put in this discussion. We want you to shake us, to bring a new concept to us, or to deep dive in concepts that we all share. We cannot imagine a better set of partners to do this. If you think of other people that should be joining the conversation, we will be happy to do that. But I am particularly delighted to have Cities Alliance leading this conversation, because not only is UCLG part of the Alliance, of Cities Alliance, but we have also been benefiting a lot from Cities Alliance vision around informalities, slums, helping us understand as local and regional governments the responsibility that we hold in addressing inequalities and developing inclusive territories. So I am delighted to have a Cities Alliance with us, but also all the other valuable partners that are going to be introduced in a moment. Again, I think almost everybody that should be here is here, I think. And if you combine that in conversations with other town halls, I think is going to be a wonderful outcome. So very grateful for you to join us. And what we can offer is a safe space for discussion. And the sky is the limit. Let us be daring and have bold proposals for our political leadership to embrace and to build our collective co-creation process. Greg, Director of Cities Alliance, thank you for accepting the challenge. we are going to give the floor first to Fatima Fernandez to explain to us the rest of the town hall process, and then we will go to you to provide some introductory remarks about how you're tackling this complex but exciting topic. Fatima Fernandez from our policy team, and in particular taking care of migration. The floor is yours to give us an overview of the whole process. Thank you, Fatima.
No, thanks to you, Emilia, and I'll really try to be brief about the process, giving just some highlights on the rationale of the process and also some milestones you might want to consider when planning ahead towards the Daejeon Congress. But I will try to be brief so that you can kickstart this very relevant conversation. So first of all, as you know, and as Emilia was recalling, the town hall process is not new. It comes from a first generation of town halls that took place before our Durban Congress and that contributed very meaningfully to shape our Durban political declaration. And building on that legacy, that the current town hall generation is also set to influence our Pact for the Future, but also our contribution to the common agenda of the UN. And just as just mentioned by Emilia, the town hall process is part of the bigger umbrella of the citizen listening process and space that you all know and have participated in. This being said, the town hall process in this generation also has some new features that it is important to acknowledge, and among those, it is important to highlight the 3 caucuses that will be participating in each one of the 4 big spaces, thematic spaces of the town halls. These cross-cutting topics, cross-cutting agendas that will be pervading the whole town hall process are the accessibility caucus, the feminist caucus, and the youth caucus. Now, how will the town hall process contribute concretely to shape the agenda of UCLG in its strategic priorities for the years to come? Well, each one of the 4 town halls, the Global Commons, Trust and Governments, Climate and Culture, and Caring Systems, is expected to deliver a policy document with recommendations for our membership. These policy documents will go through the consultation mechanism and governing bodies of UCLG. This means going through policy councils, consultation committees like through the committees, and finally the World Council of UCLG. This being said, let us go very quickly through the structure and topics of each one of the town halls. We have had in the past 2 weeks the kickoff, the thinking big meetings for all of them. This is the last one. We have the Global Commons led by the Global Platform on the Right to the City, the Town Hall on Trust and Government led by the Global Assembly of Partners, and we have also Climate and Culture led by the Climate and Heritage Network, and of course Caring Systems, you all know each other, led by the Cities Alliance, and with our colleagues from Public Service International, IFLA, the Civil Society Action Committee, and UHC 2030, and we are very much looking forward to see how your colleagues address this topic. But of course, we will also have representatives from the 3 caucuses led by World Enable, the Huayra Commission, and here today with us in the Youth Caucus, we have also a representative of the UN Major Group on Children and Youth. Now, what will be happening from here until the culmination of the town halls in our Daejeon Congress in October? Well, after this meeting, And as Emilia said, you're all invited to join us either virtually or physically, hopefully in Barcelona, for our retreat, for an all town halls meeting on the 23rd of February. But of course, before that, you're encouraged to hold meetings among yourselves, any kind of conversation, virtual or in our online platforms. I'll go to that. Well, as my colleagues are even faster than me, I will explain it already. We will set up a space in the UCLG Meets platform, which is our consultation space, for you to have a place where to gather, connect, amend, share resources, and so on and so forth. And we really hope this will be a relevant tool for you and you find it instrumental for the whole process. Now, going back to the other slide, just to show you the roadmap. After all town halls meeting, there will be deep dive visits to some, hosted by some of our UCLG members, where you will have the opportunity not only to meet each other, but also to meet our members in their daily lives, their realities on the ground. After which the drafting and consultation process for the policy documents will start. And again, there you will be encouraged to hold your own meetings, but also supported from the Secretariat, both through the online platforms and through any other space you might need us to help support. And this will lead us to the Congress. And I don't know if I am missing anything. I hope not. But in any case, I will give the floor back to Emilia, and you will complete if I missed anything. I really wish you a fruitful discussion, and we are all thrilled to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. I'm sure we are missing things, but they will let us know. Not from my recollection. I think you did a great job there. Just a couple of things to clarify as well. The drafting process of messages, etc., are gonna start whenever you want, and you will organize it however you want, and we will listen some thoughts about this at the end of the discussions with the next steps. And the field visits are field visits that we do not expect everybody to attend, but they will be a smaller size learning, peer learning visits that we will define a methodology for. We will, some of you are going to be able to join us at the retreat, and we have some ideas to co-create a bit how those visits could look like, and we will organize a session to discuss that. So they are not very big visits, but a limited number of people, so that we can all see things happening and then share with each other. So don't be afraid, we will not be asking all of you to travel. So having clarified that, the floor is now yours, Greg, to present some thoughts of how you are looking at this town hall process and what it can represent for Cities Alliance. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Emilia. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Greg Monroe. I'm the Director of Cities Alliance and facilitator of today's Thinking Big on Caring Systems. I'm joined by my colleague, Gabby Mercurio, who's also online. And Cities Alliance focuses very much on people living in urban poverty, and particularly in secondary cities, and those who are marginalized and who are often left out in decision-making and service delivery and receiving the services. So we are very pleased to be part of this process. I think when you talk about caring systems, it can sometimes be a difficult concept when you look at local and regional government. But I want to start off just by telling a story, and it's a story that when I first read it, it resonated with me, and I have told this story before, so if you've heard it, then I do apologize. But one of the great anthropologists of the world, who I think she died in the 1970s, was Margaret Mead. And she was asked by a student once what she considered to be the first sign of civilization in a culture. And her students expected her to start talking about fish hooks or clay pots or grinding stones. But no, Mead said that the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur, a thigh bone, that had been broken and then healed. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, you cannot get to the river for a drink, and you cannot hunt for food. You yourself are food for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur which is healed is evidence that someone has taken time to stay with the person who fell, has bound up their wound, has carried the person to safety, and has tended the person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts, Mead said. So importantly, it showed that someone who cared, and the first sign of civilization was caring. Now, in our context of where we work and where we in Cities Alliance work, we face in many of our cities. There's unplanned urban growth, there's migration, they result in dense neighborhoods, inadequate basic service provision, and a rise in insecurity, which usually disproportionately affects low-income women and girls. They live in vulnerable neighborhoods. They are more likely to commute to fragile work, if they have work, at very late or very early times, increasing their exposure to violence and harassment. And according to one of our recent reports, women identified unsafe public spaces, underrepresentation in local development decision-making, and lack of access to affordable care facilities as impediments to achieving improved livelihoods. Now, these difficulties for people living in poverty and informality, and particularly for women and young girls and young men and those who are differently enabled, has been made much worse by the COVID pandemic. COVID has created a pivotal moment for us for change in our society and in the way that we have local governance. We've learned that we are all in this together, that no one is safe until we are all safe. Inequities have been emphasized, and the inherent and sometimes systemic inequities in our communities, such as access to basic services and healthcare, have become much worse. It has shown how many people were one day's work away from poverty or one meal away from hunger, and how many people were pushed back into poverty during the pandemic. And it also has showed us how interdependent our formal and informal economies are, and how fragile continued employment in both can be. But we need to also look at this as a glass half full. And I'm hoping that we are at the beginning of the end of the pandemic. And COVID, we must take away something positive. It provides an opportunity for us. Politicians need to renew their social contract with citizens. We need to look at things differently. We need to look at our governance differently. And in fact, we need to move from local government to local governance. We need to increase our social capital and investment in engaging citizens to strengthen the voice of community-based organizations and civil society. We need to seek equity and accessibility and fairness in basic service delivery. And I mean meaningful basic service delivery. If water costs you more than 10% of your income, and you are more than 1 hour away from it, you do not have access to basic services. That is not meaningful access. We need inclusivity in planning our local and regional government delivery. And we need to consider issues like human mobility and the future of work. We need to create a caring system of local governance. And this process that we are in today, this Thinking Big meeting, is a very important first step, and will hopefully culminate in policy recommendations for our local and regional government politicians through the UCLG processes, which Fatima and Emilia have highlighted. So today we need to hear from you throughout today and throughout the process on how to create and foster caring systems for local government. It's easy to say we need to do it. The question is how. We need you to be bold and to be very innovative in your suggestions, and for you to make concrete recommendations which we can inform the policy recommendations as the process unfolds. So with that, I would like to hope that that does set the scene. And I think, Emilia, we're going to go to your UCLG Ubuntu advisor and then we'll go to the panel, and then we'll have some discussion. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Greg. I think that is an excellent job at setting the scene, and I really like this responsibility that I feel the UCLG membership is embracing to renew the social contract with people. I also think that people need to renew their contract with not only government, but also among themselves and with the planet. I think that your story, I had heard it before, but it's great to have it in this context. Your story about how caring for one another in those difficult times is actually the first sign of civilization. Sets a perfect scene for this Thinking Big town hall. Let us see whether Jorge is as bold as as we want him to be. Jorge Jaramillo, indeed one of our Ubuntu advisors, always helping us to prioritize topics that will be critical in our thinking. Jorge, it's about thinking about new things, but it is also about looking back and going back to the roots of some of the things that we know, right? The floor is yours, my friend. Be bold.
Thank you, Emilia. Indeed, I think this conversation must relate simultaneously to past conversations and future conversations. As far as I have just few minutes, I will jump to Spanish now because I want to be clear enough in my presentation. Entonces, creo que pues es fascinante estar en esta reunión y ver cómo seguimos trabajando en el fortalecimiento de la agenda municipalista. Yo creo que los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible, la nueva agenda urbana y toda la tradición que hemos venido construyendo de cooperación y asociatividad es fundamental. Y quiero decir que es fantástico leer la nueva propuesta del secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, Antonio Guterres, sobre nuestra agenda común. Y decir que yo creo que estamos en un momento cuando hablamos de caring systems, de sistemas de cuidado, para reconocer que convivimos hace muchos años, como hemos hablado antes, en un grupo importante de asuntos que podrían llamarse pandemias, asociados a la segregación y a la inequidad global. Creo que tenemos muchas ciudades incompletas, muchas ciudades y regiones aplazadas que reclaman esta conciencia global sobre lo que significa la ciudad como ecosistema, la ciudad como espacio de cuidado y de inclusión. Creo que tenemos que seguir focalizando el debate global, fortaleciendo las fuerzas esenciales para resolver las prioridades, priorizar necesidades con los bienes públicos necesarios con coherencia. Creo que hay mucha incoherencia y mucha capacidad de dilatar los debates para no concretarlos. Y por supuesto, como hemos planteado en diversos foros y como plantea incluso Aníbal Gaviria, uno de los líderes más especiales con quienes yo he trabajado y sigo trabajando, hablar de la vida y la equidad por un planeta saludable es urgente. Yo creo que esta idea de territorios y ciudades saludables no es solamente un problema asociado a la salud pública y a la prestación de servicios directos de salud, sino la creación de un ecosistema para la vida humana suficientemente incluyente, suficientemente accesible para todos, que no deje a nadie atrás y que permita innovaciones en las prioridades sociales, pero no solo innovaciones asociadas a las nuevas tecnologías o a ese tipo de cosas, sino innovaciones en las formas de construir comunidades, en las formas de relacionarnos con las comunidades y sobre todo en la cultura de los acuerdos, basados en la solidaridad y la inclusión. Yo creo que estas ideas no son, cuando uno habla de estas cosas, tiende a sentir que está replicando o repitiendo digamos, verdades ya dichas. Y sin embargo, yo creo que hay que insistir, reiterar estas ideas que a través de las diferentes agendas CGLU promueve como mecanismos, digamos, para construir estos acuerdos colectivos de cara a nuestro futuro. El asunto es focalizarnos mucho en qué tenemos que hacer, cuándo hay que hacerlo, cómo se hace y quién lo hace. Y esto tiene que convertirse en una cultura del acuerdo colectivo que llegue a nuestros líderes políticos, porque creo que lo hablábamos en noviembre en el encuentro en Barcelona, hay una necesidad urgente en el mundo actual de nuevos liderazgos políticos. Tenemos que fortalecer el reconocimiento de nuestra clase política y de nuestros líderes, nuestros alcaldes, nuestros gobernadores, acerca de las necesidades de la sociedad y a la urgencia, digamos, de que estas preguntas que nos hacemos en este tipo de foros realmente se resuelvan. Yo quiero insistir, Emilia y todos, en una reflexión que hicimos el año pasado, también en uno de estos foros, y tiene que ver con el fortalecimiento del conocimiento, es decir, esta implicación de la comunidad académica en los problemas reales de la sociedad. Tenemos que lograr que nuestras instituciones y la academia se conecten en muchos territorios del mundo para que ese pacto por el futuro de la humanidad realmente sea cooperativo y asociativo, no solo entre los territorios y entre la sociedad y los políticos y los líderes públicos, sino también con la investigación, el trabajo experimental, las capacidades de innovación local, etcétera, que permitan realmente avanzar mucho más rápido. Y para ir terminando, yo creo que estamos viviendo tiempos de un enorme escepticismo y mucha desilusión. Creo que esto implica que promovamos la convicción de las comunidades en ganar de nuevo confianza y crear colectivamente. Yo creo que son tiempos para la unidad, para trabajar juntos y para fortalecer mucho más la planificación, la participación intensiva de las comunidades y de los liderazgos en las comunidades con las instituciones de gobierno para que podamos desarrollar cooperación basada en el conocimiento. Yo quiero simplemente terminar mencionando algunas de las ideas fundamentales de nuestra agenda común del secretario general Antonio Guterres, que creo que resumen buena parte de los postulados que defiende nuestra organización CGLU, que es la solidaridad global, la revisión y la regeneración de nuestro contrato social, el final de la infodemia y nuevas formas de comprensión de lo que significa la prosperidad y el progreso económico. Y como proponemos desde CGLU permanentemente y desde Cities Alliance también, fortalecer el multilateralismo. Yo termino diciendo que en mi país, en mi ciudad, en mi región, Medellín y Antioquia, hemos aprendido muchísimo de estas ideas, hemos recibido solidaridad global, hemos tratado de reconstruir estas ideas de contrato social, de fortalecer nuestras relaciones de cooperación y creo que ese es un camino fundamental para construir territorios del cuidado. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Jorge, por estas palabras que yo sí creo que son atrevidas, aunque como tú dices, a veces nos suenan algunas conocidas, ¿no? Pero creo que en un momento de mucho individualismo, creo que volver a traer a colación la fuerza de lo colectivo es extremadamente importante. And there is something else that I wanted to reflect upon before I give back the floor to Greg, and that is that this system of care and care exists in our society, but we are ignoring it as a public good, and we are ignoring the collective power of care. In fact, we are not paying for the biggest part of the care that is being given. That's important. And the second thing that we need to realize is that we are not caring for those that care. The care providers in our society, not only the unpaid ones, which are mostly women all around the world, but the service, the people that work in service provision around care are the ones that are paid less, and that is linked with another notion that Jorge has brought to the discussion, which is believing that development is linked with economic growth as something that we will need to evolve from if we want really to go to a systemic care provision. So with those words and thinking that there is a lot of food for thought already put on the table, both by Greg and by Jorge. I think we are ready, Greg, for the open floor discussion from all these wonderful partners that we have and that have been working for us for a while. Greg, in your hands.
Great, thanks, Amelia. So we'll have some selected inputs from a few organizations before we open the floor. Can I ask you to try and keep your input to somewhere around 5-6 minutes and not much more than that, otherwise we will run out of time. And essentially to answer the following questions: what do you understand as caring systems and how can they be delivered? And what are the major trends that characterize us in creating this topic, in creating caring systems? So first, can I call on Rosa Pavanelli, the Secretary General of Public Services International.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you, Emilia, for inviting us to this very interesting and timing town hall. I appreciated this idea of brainstorming all together in order to find a way out from the crisis we are in. But in this brainstorming, I think that we need to have a vision for the future, but keep in mind what brought us here and the past experience we had. And so I would start by saying that it's, you know, I think we all know that care is mainly or mostly a female task. It has been on the burden, on the shoulder of women for forever, since humanity appeared on the planet. But if we want to think to a new caring system, we need to de-womanize care. We need, if we want to address the issue of gender equality, we need to start thinking that care is not an exclusive task for women, an exclusive duty for women. This entails so many things. First of all, that we need to open, you know, the schools for that are training, that are preparing caring people to men. That is not always the case. That we need to start considering that caring is a shared obligation that we have as between gender and between the family and the society. How important care is for our future is, I think we need to start thinking that care is an important factor of the economy, but not in the sense it has been intended in the past, with, from one hand, giving voucher to family and to women to take care of the needs of the family, of elders, of children, and renouncing to their jobs instead of their jobs. And on the other hand, with the financialization of the care services, that has been a trend ongoing, particularly in long-term elder care services, but not only in that. Disabled services for disabled people and these areas. We need to start considering that care is an important factor of the economy, and we need to do that by counting how much care bring to the GDP of a community, to the GDP of a country, to give the signal that this is a common economic factor, is not just about how it costs and how it can be saved by a family to provide directly the care system. Other things that I think it's important to consider is that we need to include, to have an idea of care, including all what can be delivered to care of our community. And just to briefly try to give you an idea, yes, we have childcare, yes, we have elderly and disability care, but there is domiciliary care, domestic help, transport, leisure services, health, nursing provided in structure, but also domiciliary health and nursing care, adult care, social services that can provide guidance to parents for youth, addressing the issue of education, rehabilitation, addressing the issue of addictions, addressing the issue of shelter for victims of domestic violence or abuse, or rehabilitation of prisoners. There is public housing, and there is also employment services, which can be considered part of the caring, if we want to say that our community are taking care also of those who are losing their job, who are looking for a job, and we want to create a future for our youth, And there's, of course, also all the part that refer to the environment. Are waste collectors part of the caring system? We saw during the pandemic how important they are. Are those who are recycling waste part of this caring system? Yes, they are. Those who are taking care of our environment, water, air, yes, they are. But if these are the areas where we need to identify the new commons for the future, well, we need to say that's not possible to list water in the New York Stock Exchange as a commodity that can be traded at all levels. How those services can be delivered? I think that, yes, community can do a lot. There can be space, there can be room for alliances of civil society, of citizens, of organization with local government to deliver. But I think there's a responsibility of governments at national level and at local level to deliver public services that are caring, social care public services. I think we need to address the issue that care is a human right. We need to claim for that. And there should be a shared responsibility. The service can be provided in different ways, but a major responsibility is the one of government to deliver that. And it's not just because we are defending workers in the public services and we would like to have social care services return in public hands, but also because this is the way to defeat the disillusion in politics that we see everywhere, the disillusion in political party, the loss of trust that is spreading around the world, and the very dangerous shifting towards dangerous political attitudes, thinking to all what we saw with neo-Nazi, with neo-fascist, with all anti-system organization. There's a main responsibility of national government, but the local government are the face of public towards citizens. And this is why we think that also for us as workers in public services, the alliance with mayors, with local government is crucial to defend democratic institution and to defend our democracy and our social relationship. I just conclude by mentioning that we have we issued a few months ago a manifesto for the social redistribution of care, where we call for recognizing the social and economic value of care. We call for reward and remunerate care workers with equal pay for work of equal value, to decent pension and working conditions that are often neglected or not assured to everyone, reduce the burden of unpaid care on women, redistribute the care work within the households, but also among workers and the community, eliminating the sexual division of labor that is entailed in the current idea of care, and reclaiming the public nature of care services, as I just said. And I see that it has been posted in the chat if you're interested to have a look at it. So I would stop here and happy to contribute further. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosa. And I think you've made many, many good points, but I think the genderization of care in what is a male-dominated society means that care gets pushed further down the agenda. And therefore we need to, your points are spot on. Good. So in the interest of time, can we move on to Gerald Leitner, who's the Secretary General of IFLA?
Thank you, Greg. First of all, I want to thank UCLG and especially Emilia for the invitation to join you here today, and also to Jorge for your inspirational words at the beginning. As already Greg mentioned, I'm Gerald Leitner, the Secretary General of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA for short. Our members are coming from more than 150 countries in the world, representing millions of libraries, means city libraries at the center of the cities and in the heart of the cities. We are the global voice of libraries. We are bringing together library and information professionals of all sorts across the world, both to drive efforts to ensure the best, the most inclusive library services to everyone, and to advocate for the importance of information and learning globally. Libraries are hugely multifunctional institutions, making a contribution to so many different policy agendas. You can also say they're taking care for so many parts of the societies. This can make it a challenge for us to focus sometimes. Looking across the themes of the town halls, each one has a library angle, but I admit to being particularly glad to be part of this one, focusing on caring system. It provides a great way of thinking about governments, how governance should operate. So what do caring systems mean for libraries? First of all, they are systems which place the human, not the market, at the center. They are built around the need to protect and enforce the rights of everyone, including migrants, refugees, and others without formal citizen status, to culture, information, and education, to leave no one behind. Systems that are ready and able to identify and address sources of discrimination, recognition, and internalizing intersectionality. The 2030 agenda has, at the highest level, already set out the principle that no one should be left behind. But now we are perhaps more aware than ever of how discrimination happens, how it causes harms, and urgency of responding. A caring system is one that acts on this. Secondly, they are systems that do not just content themselves with providing a bare minimum, but which look to help everyone as far as possible to realize their potential and to enjoy the highest possible standard of well-being possible. Crucially, this includes possibilities to live a healthy life, to develop the skills necessary to participate in evolving labor markets, to know and enforce your rights, and to get the best out of digital technology. Modern caring systems should, I believe, respond to the call in the UN's Our Common Agenda to establish a new social contract, not just among ourselves now, but with the future. We need to find ways not just to solve today's problems, but to set everyone up for a better tomorrow. Finally, there are systems which are not just about individuals, but about communities that recognize that we live best when we live together, building connections between ourselves and building on the strengths of all. The digital world has brought with it many benefits, but also risks of an individualization of our experience of the world. We need to find ways to reassert the importance of social, to combine the potential of technology with the power and benefits of sharing cities, towns, and villages. So I mentioned that these definitions and trends refer to a library perspective, but I haven't set out so much detail about why this is the case. Firstly, it is because building services around the individuals is at the heart of librarianship. One of the 5 laws of librarianship is the idea of to each reader their book. It's not just the job of the reader to be satisfied by whatever book they are given, rather it is the job of the librarian to find the information that the reader needs. Secondly, because libraries are not just about providing a one-way services, but about putting culture, information and knowledge and the skills to use them into the hands of everyone, helping everyone to take better decisions, to seek and seize opportunities, to grow as a person, or simply just to be able to step away from the stress and worry of COVID. And finally, because there's an increasing focus in libraries on realizing their potential to be hubs, platforms, and portals to drive a more participatory, more inclusive democratic process, to welcome every member of the community without commercial or other goals, and provide opportunities to find common references to work together. As just as one example, the Humbert Library in Dijon, location of UCLG's World Congress later this year, is a great example focused on supporting inclusion and multiculturalism. Which brings me to what it is that I hope will be the future, how we can deliver more caring systems tomorrow. First of all, we need to ensure that we are doing things in a way that starts with the individual. As before, we should not accept people to adapt their needs to services we offer, but must adapt what we do to people's needs. And in doing so, in working to leave no one behind, we need to think not just about guaranteeing a decent standard of living today, but also giving a perspective on tomorrow. Secondly, I would recommend looking at delivering policies in a way that really draws on the infrastructures that are there, that are being used. There are such great examples around the world of using libraries to deliver on a whole range of policy goals in a way that allows them to be more inclusive, more responsive, more caring. Finally, we of course need to be realistic about what this means for those working in public services, including of course librarians. I was very happy to hear Emilia at the beginning to say the very same as I'm saying now. We need to value and support the skills and training that allows professionals to respond to needs as well to ensure that our spaces, our technology are fit for purpose. We need to bring our people also in the center, otherwise we cannot take care of society. That's we should have in mind. And I'm looking very much forward. And I'm very glad to be here with you and to work together with you in the future for a better society, for our future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerald. And in fact, I have experience of a very big city with many libraries actually using their libraries as centers for economic growth and matching tenders and offers of work for small and micro enterprises and matching job opportunities for unemployed people and using libraries for economic growth. I mean, people think of libraries as being a soft social thing, and it's not. It can be the center of a community. So thank you for your input. Great. Can we go to Colin Roger, Coordinator of Civil Society Action Committee?
Thank you, Greg, and thank you so much for having us here. I think we owe a great deal of that to Amelia for the invitation and for the partnership, and particularly to Fatima, who we work very closely with and who has been a great partner in a lot of our work, which I'll touch on in a second. But first, as a quick introduction, the Civil Society Action Committee is the largest platform of civil society organizations working and engaging actively on migration policy and governance in the world today. We were formed on the eve of the high-level summit for migrants and refugees some years ago, and we've grown significantly through then, in working on all issues related to global migration governance, particularly the Global Compact for Migration, the Global Forum on Migration Development, where we also partner with UCLG and many other city governments and local authorities. And in that, the invitation to speak on caring systems is a very, very interesting one, a very compelling one. It's something that's been on my mind for quite a while now, especially in the last 2 years when we experienced the COVID pandemic, and as we try to come out of this pandemic and see what the world looks like post-pandemic. I myself am a migrant or refugee. I live in the US, and I was introduced at a very early age, at a very early point in my life, to caring systems. One of my very first jobs in informal work actually was as a domestic worker, working with my partner, caring for families, for large families, sometimes for 6, 7 children and their homes and long periods of time while their parents were on holidays and things like that. So it very introduced to the joys of caring in a domestic setting, but also the precariousness and some of the big challenges on a personal level, and that really relates in so much of what I'm about to say. But coming back to the pandemic, I think one of the things that we wanted to underline here is that when we talk about caring systems and we talk about caregivers in all contexts, and when we look at the pandemic and healthcare in particular, so much of that is built around essential workers who are migrants, who are foreign born. Just we'll take one very simple statistic. Here in the US, one of the largest economies in the world, one of the most developed economies in the world, with one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world, 1/3, 1 out of 3 of all the physicians in the US today are foreign born. And we're just talking about doctors. When we go and look at the nurses, it's even a bigger percentage. And when you look at domestic healthcare that's provided in homes, whether it's nursing homes, whether it's home caregiving, it's even much larger. It's a vast majority are foreign born. And not only that, as has been mentioned first by Rosa, I think Rosa, it's been great to be working with PSI and Rosa's colleague Genevieve Gentianos. We work a lot on public systems and public services, but Rosa pointed out right from the start that is genderized. A vast proportion of caregivers are women, and not only women, but women who are people of color from the global South. This is particularly true in developed economies and developing economies, which are looking to receive and to take in caregivers from the global South, women of color from the global South, to support their systems, which are demanding it at very cheap cost. And you see more and more bilateral agreements, more and more visa provisions that are provided just specifically for that, a very specific category of workers coming from the global south to support the care systems that are demanding that in the global north. This is something to really bear in mind. And when we look across the board, I think we'll find this globally. Globally, we find this happening. And this is a trend that will only exacerbate and only increase. It's also a trend that was significantly entrenched and exposed of during the pandemic. And why am I saying this is because during the pandemic, the precariousness of those workers that the workers experience, the precarious situations that those workers experience, the institutionalized system they are in was exposed and exacerbated during the pandemic. It's much, much more clearer what they experience. And it's not only the precariousness of that, but also when we talk about providing healthcare, providing care in a health system, not only were these workers, these migrant workers, a vast majority of those caregivers, but then they themselves were exposed to very dangerous situations during the pandemic because number one, we already know that a vast majority of people who were infected, a vast proportion, a very high rate of people who were infected with COVID were migrants. And this because migrants, by and large, work in the service sector. And that includes caring systems, includes healthcare. And as such, didn't have the opportunity, didn't have the privilege of working from home during the pandemic, didn't have the opportunity to be locked down safely during the pandemic, were forced to go to work, had to go to work, and had to be exposed, especially when we talk about healthcare system, forced to be exposed in very dangerous situations to provide the care that was needed during the pandemic. And so a lot of migrants had extremely high rates of COVID infection compared to other populations, and were also high rates of death during that time. We saw a few responses to this. We saw a few good practices to this, recognizing the essential nature of healthcare workers providing a moratorium against visa expirations and providing extensions for people to continue to work who are migrants. But these were few and very far in between. For the most part, workers were sent home, were deported, contracts were canceled by governments and by their employers, and they were thrown into even more precarious situations because sometimes they were locked into domestic abuse situations and without accessibility to support and mental health. This is true across the healthcare system. This is true across all caring systems. But one of the things that we particularly found really important is also the nature of a new solidarity that began to emerge and that had already been emerging before the pandemic and became even more clear how important it was during the pandemic. And I say this because I think this is a particularly important, when we talk about hashtag cities are listening, this is a particularly important space to be discussing that, because while we have been frustrated, while we have been failed by our national governments, we found that municipal governments, local authorities began to respond, have been responding for years now, have been responding in a way that recognize the importance of migrants within their cities, migrants within their healthcare systems, migrants within all of their service sectors that provided for vibrant and growing and developing cities. For example, cities are one of the first ones to provide firewalls against immigration enforcement when migrants or anybody was accessing health systems. If you need healthcare, if you need to go to a clinic, if you need to go to a hospital, many cities were the first ones to say, that's not where immigration enforcement should be. Somebody could go, register, and they would not be reported to an immigration official to check on their status. This is a very important thing to remove the fear from migrant communities who often live in fear of immigration enforcement on their families and in their communities, so that they can access health systems as much as they are providing those health systems. There's also cities that provided identification documents at a municipal level when a lot of workers did not have identification documents at a national level. Again, this is really important when we talk about caring systems, so that the provision of healthcare as well as the reception of healthcare in caring systems in a city context allows for migrant communities, diaspora communities, and people, regardless of their status, to be able to access both, to be able to be care providers and to be able to access healthcare. So when we step back again and look at caring systems and how can we move to a new social contract, which I think we're all really excited about talking about, we cannot touch on that without first having a core component, a cornerstone of that new social contract, be a new solidarity between migrant communities, between migrant associations, between migrant civil society movements, and city governments, and city officials, and municipal authorities. This is essential to not only enhance and build on what has been developing really well, but also to imagine new structures on how we can grow that, and to be a model and example to our national governments who have been failing us time and time again. We look forward to this discussion. We think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of that. And we really applaud UCLG for creating such a space to have these kinds of dialogues. These are essential for us, not just at a city level, but for communities around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. And people forget that the people who are working in the care system are themselves just as vulnerable as the people that they are serving. And it's something that we need to remember. Can I go to Gabriela Silvas, who's the co-chair of the UHC 2030 Steering Committee? Gabriela?
Hello, and thank you very much for this kind invitation. I would really like to recognize these initiatives. When we talk about caring systems and local governments, I think that we are going just to the most important bone of how we can rebuild public trust, how we can give a real exercise of all human rights. But some of the aspects that I would like to underline here is the need of political leadership. I think that we should understand governance as a key element to have governments, but at the same time, the citizens, from civil society, from those constituencies that very often are not being taken into account. The second part is political will. We do not only need leaders, we need also political will. We need inclusive processes. We need to place people at the center of all decisions. And that goes to solidarity, to inclusion, to care, understanding care not only as services, but also as a social protection network where health, particularly implementing universal health coverage, is key. If we take a look on how the world was 2 years ago and where we are right now, I'm afraid that we haven't learned the lessons. Now we have more poverty and we have more billionaires. We have a highly unequal planet. We are still debating about vaccines equity. We are still not giving vaccines and medicines and tests to the people that really need that. So we really need to learn the lessons from this pandemic. And again, I'm not sure that we have done that. When we talk about local governments, I think that's the best element to discuss and rebuild public trust, because that's the first part, the first step for rebuilding, for redesigning a social contract. When we go to a public office, usually it is about a local government. Usually that's the place, that's the best reference for people to think about government as a concept, because those local governments are about public services, about housing, about food in many cases, about primary healthcare. We need to understand that if we want to rebuild this planet, we need to start from our communities, to rebuild our communities. And when we do that, and when we include and work with local governments, well, then we are recreating social networks and safety and health and well-being. From UHC 2030, of course, we are convinced that health is a fundamental human right, indispensable for the exercise of other human rights. If we don't have access to health services, well, then how are we going to fight poverty, for example? Keeping the right to health at the center of health policy and legislation means creating a stronger social and financial safety nets and ensuring allocation of sufficient public resources from our national budgets based on a social contract. This means that within society, richer people agree to pay for those who cannot, healthy people for those who are not in good health, so that no one's health is left behind. We need, again, to have solidarity as the basic fabric for rebuilding public trust. Caring systems must be people-centered and inclusive. People-centered care involves engaging with people as equal partners in promoting and maintaining their health and assessing their experiences throughout the health systems, including communications, trust, respect, and preferences. This can be best achieved through a primary healthcare approach, which is the most cost-effective way to bring affordable, good quality healthcare to communities and to help safeguard vulnerable and marginalized populations. This is especially important for women and girls whose health needs are often neglected. Sometimes we believe that when we talk about caring systems is about vulnerable people. And I would like to think that vulnerability is a circumstance that we need to overcome. Vulnerability doesn't define people, and it shouldn't be seen as a lifelong policy. It has to be an emergency policy. We need to understand that we cannot continue condemning people to poverty, to discriminations, to be out of health systems. When we go back to this concept of primary healthcare, this is a whole of society approach to health that aims to maximize the level and distribution of health and well-being in the population by focusing on communities and their health needs. It has the three components. First, primary care and essential public health functions as the core of integrated health services. Second, multi-sectorial policy and action. And third, empowered people and communities. Yes, again, we need to consider people at the center of all decisions, but also, as we were mentioning before, who are the providers? When we talk about health, and go back to my job here, but for example, talking about the protection equipment and uniforms, they are designed for men, not for women, even that 70% of the health workforce are women. So we need also to take care of the different needs, not only of the population that should be receiving care, but also about the providers. We need to be clear, governments alone cannot achieve health for all. We need to institutionalize participatory governance mechanisms. We need to hold governments accountable. We need civil society, parliament. We need all different elements of society to be part of this new social contract. As conclusions, there is no question about it. Achieving health for all is a political choice that affects all of other sustainable development goals and human rights. We need local governments to rebuild public trust, but also to be the foundation of a new generation of governance, governments, and a new relationship between politicians and their constituencies. Thank you very much for this kind invitation.
Thank you, Gabriela. And as you know, primary healthcare talks about water, sanitation, housing, gender, and all these things are determinants of health. They're all determinants of a caring system. So I'm right with you, primary healthcare right at the center of local government. Great, so we now go to our three caucuses, the Youth Caucus, Feminist Caucus, and Accessibility Caucus. So I know it's World Enabled, Huala Commission, and the Youth Caucus. I do see three on my screen. So if there's a wider Commission 3, would you like to start, Feminist Caucus?
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, UCLG, for inviting us to be a part of this process. For those of you who are not familiar with the Huairou Commission, we are a women-led social movement of grassroots groups from poor, urban, rural, and indigenous communities in 42 countries around the world that work collectively to transform and improve the living condition, status, and quality of life of women, their families, and their municipalities. We are also, I think this topic about caring system is also part of one of the key points in the Economic Right and Justice Action Coalition. For those of you, I think many of you are also familiar with the Gender Equality Action Coalition. So the Economic Rights and Justice Action Coalition has a global alliance on care, and Huairou Commission is also part of that alliance. So I think this topic on care is very much the center of our constituent concerned, who work very much with their local government partners. I hear already a lot of very feminist perspective shared by Rosa, by Gabrielle, Colleen. Almost all the speakers have provided the feminist perspective and brought up the issue about, how care has always been deemed or seen as a woman's work, and that we need to change that perspective if we need to have a really caring system. So to add to the discussion and for our thinking together in this process, I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 elements I think that we need to think about when we talk about a care system and making a transformative change towards the holistic care system that put people at the center. The first one is I would look at the law and policy. What are the law and policy that we have right now? Are they really caring, or are they a way for us to make them more caring? Because this is part also what we've heard, the need to have a political will to change. Yeah. The second one is about service delivery, because a caring system, the centrality of a caring system is the service delivery, and that covers so many things. I don't need to repeat that. The third one is changing norms. So changing norms is also about changing the perspective that care usually is a woman's work. Now, care shouldn't be genderized. We heard that. So that is one point that I think we need to pay attention to. And how do we change norms? One is through education and to socialization. Yeah. And the other, another point is about financing. When we talk about care, how do we finance care? How much is the finance or the resources from the government, from the municipality goes into a really caring system? How resources for care are allocated. If you look at the budget of the municipality, and we look at items that we put into the category of a care, putting a caring system, how much is going to is gone allocated there, or if you look at the national budget, how much actually goes into putting care. And maybe, we need to look at a gender responsive participatory budgeting as a tool to actually make sure that, we have a caring system. And we also need to have data and accountability. Yeah. So how do we work together with the society, with organized groups of the community, grassroots women, and all that, to ensure that we collect the data, we have accountability. When Colin mentioned about, working the caregivers, I think one of the other aspects that we have to look at is also the gender-based violence that, people who work as caregivers are being exposed to gender-based violence. And Rosa mentioned this as well. Also, when we talk about care, a holistic care system, maybe we have to look at the built environment and also the social aspect. How does our built environment today, actually are actually inclusive, and really care for people who work at different, for everyone in the society, from the youngest to the elders, the intersectionality, both the men and women, because, not only women are, women are always deemed vulnerable, but not all women are vulnerable. There are also men who are vulnerable. And the other point is that a really caring system, Elena and Gabrielle mentioned this, should be empowering to the people, should have that empowering element. So I think as we walk together for this town hall, these are some of the thoughts that I would like to share from Huairou Commission perspective as the feminist caucus lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri. And I'm very sure that gender-based or gender responsive budgeting is going to be there right at the final paper. That's really very important. And just to highlight something you said, my spouse works in the family court in the United Kingdom, and gender-based violence during COVID skyrocketed. It didn't double. It went up exponentially, and not just gender-based violence, but also family violence, because families were locked together. And for many people could not escape their abuser. And again, it just highlights the need for the caring system and the responsive caring system of local government. Good. So World Enabled, shall we ask Victor? I see you on my screen, so I'm assuming it's Victor who's talking for World Enabled.
Yes, thank you so much. What an honor again to be here with the Accessibility Caucus, get to hear the tremendously powerful voices. I want to thank Emilia and her leadership, her entire team, for creating such a vital town hall process, participatory town hall process, caring town hall process, and specifically for the Accessibility Caucus, the work of Federico, who's been a really major champion to help the UCLG network really understand and evolve on the issue of accessibility as a cross-cutting theme. My comments today will touch upon 3 key points. One is what the caring systems are, and ultimately how they structure this new social contract. The second is going to be looking at the caring systems, empowering care workers, understanding the connection to accessibility through that. And then thirdly is how the caring systems really are about that trust governance, really this participatory caring process, which allows us to further this new social contract within a framework of democratization. My organization, World Enabled, had worked on the development of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We fought for the negotiation of that sustainable development goals and the inclusion targets therein, as well as alongside Amelia and others, many of you here on the New Urban Agenda. Now, to frame this issue of the pandemic around the radical changes that the pandemic made for caring systems, it's important to re-emphasize what previous speakers have mentioned. From the perspective of accessibility, though, caring systems aren't only just a model, but they are the fabric for a participatory, inclusive, democratic local government. The challenge, though, is that these caring systems have been radically and strongly commoditized. And we need to decommodify caring systems away from an old economic, ableist, productivist standard and respond to really these poverty traps and economic vulnerabilities that are exacerbated by the pandemic. What I mean by that is structures of a new social contract that fosters social cohesion, inclusive and innovative welfare approaches that are supported by solidarity and guarantee equitable access to essential care services for all, irrespective of whether they are participating in the labor market or are perceived as being productive, right? So a human-centered, human rights-based approach that really allows local governments to further their programs and services that allow everyone to contribute and benefit from those. Accessibility through this new social contract really is about equitable access. By identifying and eliminating barriers, whether there's institutional barriers, social barriers, physical barriers, information barriers. So you'll notice that even though the disability rights movement, of which there are nearly 1 in 7 people that live in cities are people with disabilities, and the age and older persons movement have a great desire to see accessibility advance. And there's a 40% overlap between those two communities, older persons and persons with disabilities. And a lot of this work was done by our good friend, Catherine Klein. We noticed that this issue of accessibility is really ultimately about new caring systems that empower workers to participate on their terms. So accessibility as a vehicle, transversal vehicle for advancing caring systems. Now, empowering care workers in particularly is really important because individuals that don't have access to accessibility aren't adequately being engaged on the methods or the ways that they would prefer, are left out of the economy, are basically deprived of their agency. So accessibility within a care system is also about agency enhancement. The next point I want to talk about is how the issue of agency enhancement within these care systems can be advanced, and how we can advance accessibility through adequate data collection, individuals, including the incidents, the types, the intersectional identities across race, ethnicity, language preferences, other socioeconomic data, and understand these quality matrix, again, as a way to understand the whole person and how a variety of accessibility interventions and how a variety of human-centered interventions make both prevention of disabilities, screening, treatment of disabilities and health challenges, and ultimately understand that these systems need leadership as well Do we have migrants in healthcare systems and decision-making positions? Do we have people with disabilities in these healthcare systems and decision-making positions? A very simple example in India, when the pandemic started with UCLG and Habitat, we launched something called the Equity and Access webinar series, learning series, and we heard from city leaders all over the world on how the pandemic and the lockdown was affecting persons with disabilities. And we found in India, overnight, Prime Minister Modi locked down 100 million people without putting home care workers and healthcare workers that provide services to older persons as essential services. So you had people in their homes unable to get out of bed because they weren't categorized as essential workers. So the individuals that needed that care, there was no access to those individuals. There was no access, for example, early on in the pandemic, to sign language interpretation. There was no access early on in the pandemic in terms of webinars to captions and other kind of accessibility features. So the care workers, the care systems, they need to be more resilient and more engaged through accessibility. And the final point that I want to make is all of this is obviously accelerated and can be made better and stronger and more resilient through participation. We launched with UCLG with Habitat, and now up to 30 cities, the Global Compact on Inclusive and Accessible Cities. And it'd be very interesting, and some of you have already joined that Global Compact, but it'd be very interesting to look at caring systems from the lens of this Global Compact, which really talks about 6 key principles. The principle of accessibility, the principle of participation, the principle of capacity building, the principle of data for development, and others. I think if we can customize approaches within these caring systems that focus on the individuals, if we can decentralize, localize, make more flexible, culturally sensitive caring systems, then we'll have real stakeholders. We'll have a peer-to-peer networks of caring systems. We'll have community-based organizations that have the capacity to innovate, integrate, and provide a holistic and comprehensive approach on the local level. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share these perspectives and echo the great insight from the other speakers. I'm going to leave my email address in the chat if anybody wants to follow up.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Victor. And we need to remember that the differently enabled must be at the center, that we have to have that lens on our caring system, because it very often is forgotten. This is an example you used in India. And also how essential it is to have adequate data on the various parts of our community. Now, I'm assuming that Helena Wong is the youth representative. So Helena, over to you.
Thank you very much for the floor, and also to UCLG for the invitation to voice youth priorities and continued partnership throughout all the work that we're doing so far. As Greg said, I'm Ilana Wong, and I'm here in my capacity representing the Migration Youth and Children Platform, which is a constituency of the major group for children and youth, as well as the Youth Caucus in general. We're working together to put together lots of our priorities, and I'm very excited to be able to have this platform among such amazing people to voice youth concerns. So my CP's priority is to amplify the voices of young people with migrants front and center in issues that matter to them by conducting capacity building, consultations with young leaders and organizations in every region, and facilitating their participation in decision-making spaces such as this one. From the experiences of young people globally, we see the importance of change that happens at the city level and the real, often immediate effects that it has on young people's lives. So we're very honored to be here and part of this process. I can't say how much I agree with everyone who has spoken so far, especially on needing an intersectional view and the urgency, precarity of the care system, as well as rebuilding our social contract. I think we took a macro perspective as well on what a caring system is, looking at the whole society approach that Gabriella said earlier. looking at how societal mechanisms and structures that build and perpetuate supportive, fair and equitable societies to ensure everyone has access to a dignified life and works to correct injustices as a caring system as a whole. This means ensuring that the most vulnerable are cared for and that support for them is built into inclusive policy design implementation at all levels, not just in public health services, but throughout everything that creates a caring and dignified life. And specifically for migrants as well as other vulnerable groups, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it really exposed failings and gaps in many systems within society, even those that meant to support and provide during times of need. And during this, the vulnerable became more vulnerable, and in too many cases suffered greatly from a broken social contract that no longer centers human lives. And so we really believe that a lot of the main trends has revolved around this, not just urgent gaps in the provision of essential services such as healthcare, including mental health support, which is still not properly recognized or funded across the world, but also everything that leads into it: education, humane housing, legal protection, basic food and water. These were very inaccessible to a lot of minority and migrant populations, youth, other vulnerable groups such as the differently abled that Victor said earlier. For example, many low-income youth had a severe lack of access to technology to continue education, connect to important socialization support through their friends, and really suffered from the mental health as a result of it. And particularly when it came to protecting vulnerable groups from exploitation, such as irregular migrants, there was a definitive lack of access to caring systems that emphasized protection and human rights. Not only were they unable to access the care itself, and in many countries, access to basic needs now, such as the COVID vaccinations, is still in question, but many of them suffered at the same time from labor exploitation, the sort of lack of care that associated with things like trafficking, but they also risk criminalization when they try to seek basic care services, which is a huge issue, because if migrants and vulnerable groups do not feel safe trying to access these services, then how can we look after them properly? So there really needs to be a decriminalization around these aspects when people are trying to seek basic human rights and basic care systems. Further, the current services are not inclusive in design. They leave vulnerable groups, including women, young people, LGBTQIA+, and those with disabilities specifically exposed, particularly in crucial cases like even accessing areas where they need healthcare, leaving the house, and also mobility support later. How do they recover from, for example, having to leave employment due to lack of access, due to being kept at home during COVID? A lot of times, specifically, the vulnerabilities that are exposed within these are not paid attention to, and the system goes back to privileging those which already had access in the first place. And a major trend as well is that civil society and other grassroots stakeholders have stepped in to provide essential and urgent services and support where government systems have failed. And they saved countless lives both during and before the pandemic, but they still urgently lack funding and scaling to reach these vulnerable populations. And so we would really love to see governments create systems that allow for these irregular and vulnerable groups to access these essential services, such as removing things like the need for documentation when accessing basic healthcare, implementing local systems of qualification without repercussion of criminalization, and ensure that migrant workers and communities and youth, even those who are displaced, for example, due to losing their visa after going online for school and not being able to get home during COVID, and provide the exact same access to financial support, decent humane housing and healthcare services, as well as basic services that we need now as a modern society, such as technology and internet. And this includes protections and justice, such as wage theft, being addressed at a local government level. This is where we see the most change and the most immediate provision of support. And that's where we need people to step up and say, hey, our citizens need this. We need funding for this, and we need central government to pay attention to this as well. And we also need them to implement inclusive systems that are co-designed with members of vulnerable groups at all levels of policymaking. So not just from consultation, but to the decision-making itself, where participation of these representatives are facilitated and they're viewed as equals and compensated for the skills and their time. And finally, we need to support and fund civil society and other grassroots actors, especially those established by those with this intersectional lived experiences we've been speaking of, who are currently filling the urgent gaps and ensure that they're able to scale the impact and ensure continuity through incorporation into government support programs, because they've now gained the trust of so many communities out there who are still lacking from access to these caring systems. I was actually going to cite the exact same story, Dr. Mead, about Dr. Mead that you willingly told earlier, Mr. Monroe. So I won't repeat it again because you beat me to it, and I can hardly match your cadence eloquence. But I do want to highlight how beautiful it is that, you know, separated by oceans and time zones, we have this exact same thought for a caring civilization. And there's an Ubuntu saying that my fellow caucus member Daniel told me earlier, which captured this, I think. I am because we are. And I think it's time that we return to this core heart of society and rebuild our systems on compassion, empathy, and hope. So I look forward to our discussion and echo as well Colin's praise of such an open, dynamic space. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Alana. And you know, we often think about migrants and we often think about youth, but we never put the two together. We don't often put the two together. And you know, not all is lost. And just last week in Cities Alliance, we were notified by the Office of the Prime Minister of a country, which I'm not going to go into details now, and basically the Prime Minister was saying, could we help working and designing a process of incorporating migrants, and especially young migrants, into the fabric of society, socially and economically, because they have so much to offer. And that was very refreshing to hear that. So not all is lost. Great. So as usual, we're going to run out of time, but we do open the floor for any other input. I do know that there were two people who are involved in the Gold 6 report. And the one was Camilla Kochina, another one was Olga Segovia. I don't know if they are here, if they want to say anything, because they are involved in the Gold 6 report, and this will be part of that. Olga or Camilla?
I can go first and then give it to.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Greg, and hi, everyone. Thank you very much for this extremely inspiring session. And it's so good to hear so many people, as you have all highlighted, having so many synergies in the way the caring systems are approached in this town hall process. So just a bit of background for those of you who don't know, we are working on the next Gold report that is going to be focusing on pathways to urban and territorial equality, and that's going to be launched in October this year. That we hope is going to provide a summary of the research and documented experiences from civil society, from UCLG committee, from researchers that we hope we can inform these agendas that we are discussing in the context of the town hall, and the vision about this new social contract from an urban and territorial equality perspective. So in relation to the overlaps with these caring systems town hall, I think there are two ways in which this can be seen. First, I think there is this overall shifting of the government role from this service provision to governments that care. That is a central aspect to build pathways to urban and territorial equality, and that is present in the work that Gold has been doing across the last 18 months. But secondly, is that these pathways to urban territorial equality that the report is presenting is actually a series of concrete trajectories that local and regional governments can take and are actually taking towards equality. And we have named these pathways in 6 groups. So one is commoning, that is about this having a collective understanding about the access to housing, land and service. Another one is connecting, about connection both digital and physical. One is about renaturing, that is about re-embedding natural and urban systems with each other, one about prospering, one about democratizing, and also one about caring. And it's one particular pathway that we see as an essential pathways that local and regional governments can take to advance urban and territorial equality. So as I say, as Greg say, Olga is with us, and Olga is one of the authors that have curated this caring chapter. That is a chapter that actually has so many overlaps with so many of the discussions that have been shared here in terms of intersectional and right-based approach to redesign this social contract, both for those who care and those who take care. So yeah, I'm just going to give it to Olga so she can share a bit more of a few details that hopefully can also bring some light into some of the points that the town hall is addressing.
Great, thanks. Olga?
Hola, buenas. Hola, ¿qué tal? Un gusto estar con ustedes. Gracias, Camila. Voy a poner algunos puntos que me parecen interesantes para este debate. Considerar los cuidados como un asunto de interés público, reconocerlos como una función central es reconocerlos como una función central para la reproducción de la vida que ha sido históricamente invisibilizada. Hoy día en el debate actual me parece que el debate sobre los cuidados debe ser abordado desde una perspectiva de corresponsabilidad social y de género por parte de los actores públicos de diferentes escalas. Acorde con unas demandas de las sociedades más inclusivas, equitativas, sostenibles, los gobiernos locales y regionales desempeñan un rol absolutamente clave. Y avanzar en un contrato social que incorpore las políticas de cuidado como un pilar del bienestar, creando condiciones tanto materiales, institucionales y simbólicas que rompan con la división sexual del trabajo. A una división sexual del trabajo que es un pilar de la desigualdad de género. Y por tanto reconozca los derechos tanto de quienes reciben cuidados y de quienes proveen cuidados. El mercado solo puede resolver parte de las demandas de cuidado. Por lo tanto, en las propuestas de políticas de cuidado hay que incluir la economía no monetarizada, que reconozca la producción de la mayoría, de la inmensa mayoría del cuidado directo e indirecto que se realiza principalmente en los hogares y entidades sin ánimos de lucro. Territorios y ciudades cuidadoras, que es un concepto que nos parece muy importante poder poner en el debate público, debe valorizar el ámbito de la reproducción social, el espacio de la vida cotidiana, en las cuales las labores de cuidado son esenciales, y formular políticas y modelos de gestión que respondan a los desafíos de nuestras sociedades en creciente transformación demográfica, socioeconómica y tecnológica. Por ejemplo, proveyendo servicios para el cuidado desde una visión inclusiva que requiere identificar prioridades de localización en el territorio y programas destinados a compatibilizar el tiempo doméstico y tiempos laborales. La distribución del tiempo es fundamental para pensar políticas de cuidado con igualdad de género. Y en ese sentido hay muchísimas herramientas que podemos incorporar. Desde una perspectiva de igualdad de género y territorial es central reconocer, hacer visible y revalorizar el trabajo de cuidados como labor clave para el bienestar de las sociedades. Redistribuir de manera más justa y equilibrada el trabajo de cuidados no remunerado, realizado, como se ha dicho aquí, mayoritariamente por las mujeres, y la responsabilidad de distribuirla en la responsabilidad entre hombres y mujeres, y reducir la carga de trabajo no remunerado, y dar mayor cobertura a necesidades básicas desde un enfoque de derecho basado en los principios de igualdad, universalidad y solidaridad. ¿Qué significa lo anterior de nuestra perspectiva? Significa democratizar, redistribuir la oferta de los cuidados entre el Estado, el mercado, la comunidad y la familia, desmercantilizar la experiencia, cambiar el concepto de quién puede pagar, puede acceder, y defeminizar, desconstruir los roles de género, haciendo el cuidado una opción e incluir la protección social a quienes prestan cuidado no remunerado. Recogiendo estos enfoques y diversas perspectivas impulsadas y articuladas por parte de los gobiernos locales y regionales y organizaciones de la sociedad civil y académica, el capítulo Cuidar del próximo informe Gold propone reconocer y democratizar, redistribuir y desmercantilizar y reducir y defeminizar los cuidados. Y también se señala la importancia del cruce entre cuidado y territorio, perspectiva que demanda el liderazgo de los gobiernos locales y regionales para promover la inclusión y la igualdad de género como principios orientadores en el debate social, académico y político sobre los cuidados. Muchas gracias. Esos eran algunos puntos que me interesaba poder colocar en este debate. Gracias.
Great. Thank you, Camilla and Olga. We've got only 10 minutes left, so I'm going to there might be space for one more comment if anybody wants to make a comment. This is not the last opportunity you have, but if anybody would like to raise anything, any burning issue? Right, so we do have, as Fatima said earlier, that obviously there is the UCLG retreat in the week of the 21st of February. But between today's meeting on the 1st of February and I think it's the 23rd of February and the retreat when we will look at the different town halls, we can advance the discussion. We can do that in two ways. One is we could have another meeting, or if you wanted to, and if we had any ideas later tonight or tomorrow or next week, you can just you can email it. And I'm just putting the town hall email back into the chat. So there's a town hall email. So feel free to also email ideas or thoughts that have not been captured today or that we haven't actually thought of today. There is flexibility in this process, and we can have another meeting or subsets of meetings. So for Cities Alliance as one, I mean, we have got quite a big civil society component in our membership. So we are going to also ask our civil society membership for their input. And I encourage all of you to do the same if you are parts of broader networks. Because the more people that participate in this, the richer the outcome. And with that, can I hand back to Emilia?
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, everybody. I think it has been really, truly, truly inspiring. Oh, Greg, I see that Gisela Chala, the Vice Mayor of Quito, who is with us, was trying to raise her hand, but we couldn't see her. No te veíamos, alcaldesa. ¿Tienes la palabra? ¿No te oímos aún?
Sí, buenos días. Un saludo desde Quito, Ecuador. Me pido disculpas, no he podido encender mi cámara. Tengo fallas de conexión frente a una desgracia una tragedia que está suscitando en estos momentos en Quito. Y esto creo que es más que oportuno el poder colocar la necesidad de que los cuidados no vayan enfocados solo en los seres humanos, sino también dentro de esta dinámica del cambio climático. Nuestra responsabilidad de cuidarnos, pero también cuidando el planeta, no puede seguir relegándose. Es necesario plantear dentro de este nuevo pacto, de este nuevo contrato social que se debe tocar. No podemos hablar de un contrato social sin plantear las inequidades que se amplifican en los riesgos, incluidos los naturales. Por eso es fundamental construir ciudades del buen vivir y también lo más importante, de mi compromiso como la primera mujer afroecuatoriana en 200 años en llegar a la vicealcaldía de Quito. Es poder precisamente desde este enfoque de cuidados y los derechos, del derecho a la ciudad, desde la función social y ambiental, poder generar un nuevo contrato social que debe estar obligado a resolver esas deudas históricas, que en el caso de la pandemia, la tragedia que estamos viviendo en estos momentos en Quito, estas deudas mayores con los gobiernos son los cuidados, la erradicación de las violencias, pero aquella violencia que es mucho más fuerte, el empobrecimiento y la indiferencia, esa violencia que invisibiliza las necesidades de los demás. Estamos desde el 2019 liderando en el gobierno local temas de jóvenes, de adultos mayores, pero también pueblos y nacionalidades, es decir, pueblos originarios, que tenemos un rol fundamental. No solo ser parte de combatir esta segregación socioespacial, sino también construir este nuevo futuro, nuevas masculinidades para erradicar las violencias de género, que es necesario reconstruir un enfoque de cuidados. Hasta ahora sigue siendo relegado, sigue siendo visto como un tema clientelar. Eso debemos dejar atrás como mujer política y como las mujeres que estamos en estos espacios. Necesitamos erradicar la violencia política que viene aquejando y tratando de menoscabar y de restar la importancia a estos temas que son fundamentales, los cuidados no desde lo asistencial patriarcal, sino los cuidados desde los derechos. Este es mi compromiso. Estamos aquí, me he tenido que conectar desde el vehículo porque estamos tratando de llegar a al punto donde está la tragedia, pero nuestro compromiso para con CGLU, para con el mundo, para con las mujeres en este nuevo contrato social será no por el cargo que tenemos en este tiempo, sino más bien poder generar transformaciones y seguir motivando a que desde estos caucus, desde estos cabildos, desde la juventud, seamos sujetos de transformación, no objetos, sino más bien sujetos. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, vicealcaldesa, y nuestros mejores deseos para las familias de esa avalancha que ha habido y también nosotros nos entristecemos mucho con esos fallecidos y con las familias que van a tener que superar no solo esta tragedia, ¿no? Pero también la infraestructura que quede después de la avalancha. Suerte con eso, vicealcaldesa, y muchísimas gracias por este compromiso que manifiesta entrando hoy aquí. Sé que está desde muy tempranito ahí acompañando a las víctimas, y las noticias que llegan son pues muy descorazonadoras, ¿no? Pero realmente creo que sí, que era justamente un cabildo que puede prestarle mucha atención a este tipo de necesidades. So, colleagues, after this intervention that touches all of our hearts and makes us realize that this is for real, this is about service provision and as close to the people as it gets, that what we are doing counts, that what we say is not only about talking, but about defining how we act in this kind of situation. I can only thank you for very inspiring exchanges, but I think also very pragmatic ways forward that you have proposed in terms of messaging, in terms of narrative. I think what we are proposing here is a true shift of priorities. And how do we articulate that shift of priorities in policy making, in the political will, in the political leadership, is what is going to be critical in the coming time. I think there is a lot of material here to work with, and as Greg was saying, there are things that we can do between now and the retreat. At the retreat, we are going to be looking at a joint session. During this joint session of all the town halls, we will see how some of the concerns that we have in the different conversations connect with each other. We're also going to be hearing of the full discussion that we are having around the path towards equality, which we are putting at the center of our research work. And hopefully we are going to be able to connect the dots and identify those areas that necessitate deeper thinking and digging. We are going to open this interactive space, which we call UCLG Meets, hopefully tomorrow or the day after, so that you can put in there all your thoughts and resources, and we can open up this forum for discussion and concrete drafting. I really welcome Greg having others also join this discussion. So certainly I can think Slum Dwellers International and WeGo colleagues, I am certain they will be able to provide very critical input. So any other federation or partners that are here today and that think that others should be joining, please don't hesitate proposing that. Also recall that we have the colleagues of Global CAD that are going to be putting together some of the critical messages and think pieces that you have shared, so that we can all organize thoughts, and they are going to be published in our UCLG Meets interactive space for you to consider. We will also ensure that the extensive notes that our friend Kathy Klein from the caucus on accessibility also are shared with you, and she always makes them available, and I think it's a great tool for you to look at whether there are other issues that we need to consider in the conversations. So I would like to leave it here, thanking each of you for the wonderful exchanges and for joining the process, because it's not the end of something, it's the beginning of something that can actually shape new policy, a new future, that new social contract that we are all looking forward to having. Thank you in particular, Greg and colleagues of Cities Alliance, but also everybody else. Please do keep healthy, calm and creative, and see you all soon again, and hopefully in person at our retreat. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Take care, please. Bye.